righty. Well, we're going to finish this thing up. We promised everybody last week a little classic wrestling, and unfortunately, we got running long, so we said we'd do it this week, and that's what we will as a palate cleanser from what we've been dealing with. Let's go back in the archives. A lot of people know we were doing a project in 2024, Brian, where we went back and looked at my 1984 schedule day by day and the trials and tribulations of a young man in the wrestling business in Mid-South Wrestling. Except things started happening, and it's taken us longer to get through 1984 than it did for me actually to live it. And it's 2025, and we're still only to April 1st. So we thought we'd give the people the first week of April 1984 in Mid-South Wrestling, which ends up with me in the Superdome for the first time. And if the people would like to catch up with where we are so far on the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel, we've got the 1983 clips we've done and 1984 a week or two at a time, or the omnibuses out there for the first quarter.
That's
so
right.
they can catch up with us and kind of get the feel of things. But briefly, we had shot the angle with Bill Watts, and the last Stampede had been booked and advertised and was just beginning. And at the same time, the Rock and Roll Express had shoved my face in a cake, so we were mad at them. And Pork Chop Cash and the Dream Machine, the Bruise Brothers, had been brought in by Bill Dundee, the booker from Memphis, to be another top babyface team, and we had an issue with them. But as we will recall, the Dream Machine, right before the biggest break of his career, broke his ankle in a match in Nashville, and I believe it was Nashville, and had to drop out of the deal, and they ixnayed the Bruise Brothers, and we're finishing that up at this point now also. And otherwise, business-wise, $1 in 1984 equals $3 in today's money. So it's a nice, easy, just formula, triple everything. We're talking about the financial figures in order to get a grip on where it stood. Otherwise, are you ready to go, Brian?
First week of April, 1984.
And Monday, April 2nd, we were in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which was a fairly easy trip of 200 miles round trip. And we were booked against the Bruise Brothers in the semifinal on the card. But unfortunately, as I said, Dream had broken his ankle. So Bill Dundee was taking his place, and they were putting us over in the rest of the dates. So we beat the Bruise Brothers. We beat Pork Chop, since Dundee he knew he'd be back sometime or another, but poor Pork Chop was on the way out. So we beat Pork Chop, boom, 1, 2, 3. The house was $8,600 in Baton Rouge that week, not replicating the success we'd been having in other places just yet. So we made $100. But it was Monday night, and we had big things coming up, because the next day, Tuesday, April 3rd, the 10th anniversary of the April 3rd, 1974 tornadoes in Louisville, by the way. So my butthole was puckering even then. But we were in Shreveport, Louisiana at the old auditorium, the Memorial Auditorium. And since we had shot the angle with Watts in Shreveport at the Irish McNeil Boys Club, where we did the TV tapings, Shreveport was right up to date with airing the TV show. So the first Last Stampede match with Bill Watts and Stagger Lee, Junkyard Dog, was in Shreveport. So this was the first time we were going to get a kind of an idea of what this thing was going to be like and how it was going to go, because none of us had ever even seen Bill Watts work in person, right? And we knew the shape the dog was in at that particular time. But at the same time, this was our big break, right? So not only did we see how the match was going to go, but we thought we'll see how this is going to draw, because everybody thinks it's going to do good, but my God, So it was kind of cool to have this match in the Memorial Auditorium in Shreveport, Brian, because it was one of the oldest wrestling buildings still in the Mid-South Territory. I mean, Elvis had been on the stage for the Louisiana Hayride radio broadcasts in the mid 50s, and Sputnik Monroe had worked there, and they'd had wrestling in that building going back to, I think, the 20s and 30s. And it was an old fashioned kind of crowd and look, and working with Watts in that environment, it really got us broke into it. But the point is, the house was $26,500 in the Shreveport Memorial Auditorium. It was the record house that they had ever done in a building that they had been running longer than almost any other building in their town or in any of their towns. And that's the equivalent, as we said, a $75,000 house in a town they ran every 2 weeks and TV every 2 weeks on the opposite week. And we each made $400, which is equal to $1,200, but that was probably a close to record payoff out of Shreveport. There was one of the smaller buildings and one of the, that was probably 2,500 people. Maybe they jammed them in there because it was a sellout, but they raised the prices for all of the Last Stampede matches from what the normal ticket prices were for the normal shows. So I didn't write them down. I didn't get started doing that until later. But whereas Shreveport would probably be normally $7 ringside, $5 general admission, $3 kids, 7, 5, and 3, they probably went to 10, 7, and 4. So they were building their grosses up on some of these buildings that were records because they had higher ticket prices than they had charged previously. Anyway, the match was what it was. It was, the stipulation was if we lost, I was going to get stripped down and dressed in my mother's pink dress. And that's what they did. Watts made the comeback. Stagger Lee gave Bobby the power slam. I threw the tennis racket to poor Bobby. But at the same time, the referee was with Dennis and Watts, and Bobby and Stagger Lee had a double knockout where I put the powder in Bobby's hand. So as he went to blind Watts, Watts kicked the powder, gave him the Oklahoma Stampede, boom, 1, 2, 3. And then I was stripped down and put in a dress to the folks' delight.
Was it a different stipulation or was it the same stipulation? I know there were different variations. There was the baby bottle, there was a diaper, there was your mother's dress. Was it different every night?
It depended on the geography, because in New Orleans, the Superdome, it was a baby bottle and a diaper. So therefore, since Baton Rouge may have been, close, kind of in the same general TV area, they would do the dress. Or in, no, not Laranja, but goddamn it, Hammond, Louisiana, because that was so close to where they'd done the dress in Baton Rouge and the diaper in New Orleans, they tarred and feathered me. So it just, but the main two were the diaper and the dress. And I liked the dress better because fucking dog, every night he would take a big swallow of milk from this oversized baby bottle, and then he'd give me a kiss and spit the milk in my mouth.
Ew.
Yeah. But having said that, when they were diapering me, Watts would take the giant, they had a giant oversized, what now?
That's just a sentence, a transition you never hear before.
When they were diapering me, they had an oversized safety pin. It was like a large adult, costume safety pin or whatever. And Watts would stick me in the stomach. So I'd say, ow, ow, ow. So I like the dress better. But anyway, so now we got an idea. My God, they sold out the building. They did a record house in a place that they've been running for quite a while. And even though it's a $400 payoff for one of the small buildings, we're thinking, my God, with the bigger ones, yeah. And besides, I was just, as you will recall, my average per week, my last, 6 weeks in the Tennessee territory was like $150. So we were more than pleased with this. And Shreveport was the 130-mile trip up the state highway. You did the Tuesday night house show at the auditorium, and then we did promos on Wednesday morning at Channel 3, as we did every week. And then, boom, we hit the road and went over to Jackson, Mississippi, which was 200 miles from there. And there, the TV was still behind. We weren't with the last Stampede yet. We had the Bruise Brothers. It was scheduled to be a title match, but we instead worked with Porkchop and Dundee and did the same finish as we did in Baton Rouge. But this time, Jackson was starting to come up with the rest of the territory, and Jackson did $28,500. And we made a $300 payoff. And that's what I'm talking about is we knew that if Jackson did the same basic house that Shreveport did, Shreveport set a record, but Jackson's a bigger building in a bigger town. And we made almost the same money for working the main event on a kind of a okay house as we did a record house in Shreveport. So we knew the bigger towns had room to grow, right? And again, then we back to Alexandria, 200 miles. So far, the trips haven't been that bad this week. We're coming up on that.
When you know you're
And
gonna,
we had.
can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
When you know
Yeah.
you're going to pay the wrestlers and the talent more money because there are big shows coming up that week or the next week, whatever it is, can you get away with paying them less right before it?
Well, it depends. It depends on who's involved in drawing the money on the big shows and et cetera, and whether they're going to be happy. And then the other guys that are just on the card, they're kind of taking whatever they get regardless. So there was everybody at the end of the day was taking what they were given, but there was some people that were more apt to be or in line to be upset about the payoffs when they were the ones drawing the money. And because it ended up by the summertime when the opening match guys in the territory were making $1,000 a week, which would be like $3,000 today. And, they're thinking, geez, this is great. We could main event some places and not make $1,000 a week. Anyway, back to the suffering. Thursday, April 5th was the spot show that week. We were in Crossett, Arkansas, and an outdoor show at the ball field on April 5th against the Rock and Roll Express. One of the early matches with them, people wanted to see it on the spot shows. And boom, and we did a nice, easy thing where it was the same thing we had done in Lafayette the previous week, a disqualification on us for throwing powder in the eyes. Nothing was settled. But this was a $10,000 spot show. And at spot show prices, that meant in Crossett, Arkansas, we drew somewhere around 1,200 to 1,400 people and picked up another couple of $100. And it was a 300-mile round trip, but we were back home that night. And then the weekend started. And this was where the travel began and the money started. And then we went on a pretty good run, which we won't complete today because it was for like the next 6 weeks. But on Friday night, April 6th, we were in Houston. And this was the card the week before the last Stampede match. The last Stampede match would be on a special Sunday night show on April 15th. But 8 days beforehand, we were there for the regular Friday night show. We had been booked in the main event for the tag team title against the Bruise Brothers. And to give you an idea of what the cards were like then, this is the whole card for Houston that night. It was Tom Zink over John King in the opening match. Jerry Gray beat Joe Savoldi, match number 2. Hector Guerrero beat Masayo Ito by disqualification. And then the feature matches started. The Rock and Roll Express beat Butch Reed and Buddy Landell. Magnum TA beat Mr. Wrestling 2 by disqualification for the North American title. Crusher Darso and Nikolai Volkov beat Hacksaw Duggan and Terry Taylor. That was a grudge match. And then we were booked to be the main event, but since it was a substitution, we went on before that, but we beat Bill Dundee and Porkchop Cash. And that house for that card was $54,000. And we made $500 a piece for our match. So the equivalent of $150,000 and $1,500. And that was a 500-mile round trip for us, as usual. But we saw we're coming back in 9 days against Watts. And again, we're already doing $50,000. What the fuck are we going to do there? This is why we were getting excited. And of course, that was the night before the Superdome. So we went back 250 long miles to Houston, have the match, don't leave there till 10:30, get back at 2:00 in the morning or whatever. And then, as I said, the next night being the New Orleans Superdome, we got to be there early. And we've never gone to the building. We want to make sure to get into the traffic. Mama Cornette flew down, as a matter of fact, to New Orleans. And I picked her up at the hotel and took her for that show. They put her in the box because I didn't want any of that. Not in the box. It sounded like they put her in a fucking
Put her in the
cell.
penalty box. That's Mama Cornette. We don't know what she'll do.
Put her in the hole so she can't interfere. No, they put her in one of the skyboxes because the people might have been violent with her if they'd found out that she was my mother. So we got there early and we snuck in the back through the parking garage, and Jack Curtis escorted her up to the skybox so she could watch from there. But she was freaking the fuck out because think about this. She knew the Tennessee wrestlers and wrestling business. She'd been around it. She knew the guys, friends with Teeny, knew the buildings, but she comes to the Superdome and there is her son being abused by a bunch of people that she's never met before in front of 25,000 fucking people. She didn't know what to think, right? But anyway, that night, April 7th, that was the last Stampede night. But again, a lot of people don't remember that was sort of a lights out match because we still had the program going with the Bruise Brothers, and Dundee had booked a tag title match with the Bruise Brothers underneath the last Stampede match because he thought they would be huge in New Orleans and he wanted to keep the thing going. And they'd arranged to fly Jimmy Hart down to be in the Bruise's corner against the Midnight with Me because people in Louisiana, they didn't really know who Jimmy Hart was either, but it was just an extra bonus of something. They'd read about him in the magazines. They hadn't seen him on TV. But he sent promos down and, it was a big deal, right? And then he had to manage Porkchop and Dundee. And so that's the only time there was that, and there was Houston a week later, the only time that Jimmy Hart ever managed Bill Dundee. Think about that. Nevertheless, we get down to the meat of the matter. We have the match with Porkchop and Dundee, and we beat them when me and Jimmy got in a falderall and distracted the referee. And then we had the main event with Watts and Stagger Lee. The tape is out there. I think it's on YouTube, but Dog was in his own world at that point, but the people went absolutely insane for everything that Bill Watts did. And I know a lot of people go look at fucking Bobby Eaton when they watch these matches. If Watts pointed a finger at Bobby was flying over the top rope. Because here we all came from Memphis and they were making $400 a week when I was making 150, right? It wasn't like they were cleaning up. And suddenly we've got this spot. We've been making these checks so far, and now we're working with the boss. And we didn't know the house at the time we went in the ring, but it ended up $176,000, the second best Superdome gate that they ever did behind Dog and Michael Hayes at $183,000. It was the best one they'd ever done in April. And we did 23,000 people. So the 176 with our formula would equal over $500,000 in a town that they ran in some fashion or another every week at that point. And our payoff that night was $2,000, which would be $6,000 a piece in today's money, or literally what it would have taken me in Tennessee at the rate I was going 3 months of working 5 times a night to make. I made it in the same night. And they diapered me and baby bottled me and spit milk in my mouth and stuck me with the goddamn safety pin. But Brian, obviously you've seen the tape. You may have one of the original copies of the tape.
Yeah.
The people went absolutely insane for everything Bill Watts did. That was the mark of Mid-South wrestling. It was like Austin stomping a mud hole in you. Even though he was older and immobile, they couldn't see through it. It was goddamn chaos.
And he was slower. And you know what? It took him time to draw back and throw his punch, but his face was selling, though. Like, everything about him was into what he was doing. And he didn't have to do much, and he couldn't do much. And, yeah, I got the Superdome
But he did what they wanted to see him do.
I got the Superdome footage. I know there's other footage that's publicly out there, like Houston and different places, but, you know, you brought up the road to get in there. Did you hear anything from him, just that you guys, or specifically this angle based on this night, had exceeded their expectations? You said they expected big things. They didn't expect this, did they?
No, and well, they may have expected, because again, they'd done better in the Superdome. We'd drawn one record house. We'd drawn a couple of record houses before Watts even got in the ring with us. But I don't know. They still didn't think it was going to be as big as it got. And again, the Superdome is a big deal, but you expect it to be a big deal. But not to jump ahead, and we've got one more day in this week, but by the time it was over with, they'd done 16 shows where Watts came back and they did the last Stampede match. 9 of them were sellouts. 11 of them were record gates. As I said, we did the number 2 dome by $6,000. But in a period of 5 weeks, besides the other shows, because they were running every night, but just those 16 shows sold 110,000 tickets and grossed over $800,000, which again, triple that is $2.5 million. And for the 5-week period, counting all the shows, Mid-South Wrestling grossed $1.2 million in 1984. And at the time, it was, what was it? Was it the 5th biggest wrestling territory in the United States? The WWF, AWA, Crockett. Help me out.
You're talking about in terms of business or geography?
In terms of business. Well, in terms of business, but geography probably also. The AWA would gross more than Mid-South. So would the WWF. So would Crockett. I think Mid-South, even though the Dallas world-class houses were bigger at the Reunion Arena, as a territory, Mid-South outgrossed world-class. So, but that was ridiculous numbers for the 4th largest territory in the country to be grossing over $1 million in a little over a month, when there were another 20 fucking territories all running full time. This was only in 4 fucking states. So that when the Watts was loving the matches, because nobody had taken bumps like Dennis and Bobby did for him in 20 years. And he loved working with them because there was a night off and the people went crazy over it. But I think after the entire run was over with, that's when he realized that, my God, we're only in May. These guys are still hot and I'm drawing more money with them. After we've done something like this, that's when, you know, we exceeded all of their expectations. And we exceeded the speed limit on the way out of New Orleans, because I had to drop my mom off at the hotel and get back through Alexandria, because the next day was an Oklahoma City show, but it was a rare deal where we didn't have a double shot on that Sunday. So we got back to Alexandria probably 3:00 in the morning and left to go to Oklahoma City, which was 530 more miles, somewhere around 9 in the morning. And we went up there and did another match for the title with the Bruise Brothers that ended up, unfortunately, being Dundee. But that night, and listen to this fucking card. This is a card that drew 13,000 people. It was a record for people in the city of Oklahoma City, even though there was regular prices not raised because it wasn't the last Stampede. And they did $68,800. And we each made $600 payoffs for our part in this. But point being, Mid-South Wrestling, with the Superdome, a regular show in Oak City and a regular show in Houston, did $300,000 gross in 3 days. That's, again, almost $1 million in today's money. And this was just one of the wrestling territories. And Oak City had Dr. Death Steve Williams beat Jerry Gray, Masayo Ito beat Lanny Poffo, Terry Taylor beat Butch Reed by disqualification, the Rock and Roll Express beat Nikolai Volkov and Crusher Darso, later Khrushchev, Kerry Von Erich beat Buddy Landell, he was a guest from Dallas, Magnum TA beat Wrestling 2, the Midnights beat Dundee and Porkchop, and Sunshine beat Jimmy Garvin, who was blindfolded and had one arm tied behind his back, which was hot off the Dallas TV. So we did, and if you want to look at it for people, we sold 40,000 tickets in 3 days. And we were thinking, what the fuck? And of course, that Oak City trip, hell of a goddamn drive. And then we had to go for the following Monday, which we'll pick up with next time, or the following day, which was Monday. We had to drive 330 miles straight east to get to Little Rock. So that week, we drove 2,500 miles. We worked every night of the week and did promos on Wednesday, but we each made $4,225 for that week, which is equal to almost 13 grand in today's money, and was a long way from the $150 I was making back in November. And that's when we realized that we had something.
Does it change the way you feel about everything when you leave these shows and you know you're having this kind of success? I mean, you had success from the moment you got there, and you got relatively good payoffs from the moment you got there, when it was a show with a crowd. But the energy, like leaving knowing that you were in the main event.
Oh, yeah.
That you set records. I mean, you set records for like a week straight, 2 weeks straight. You guys set records everywhere, whatever it was, 2 weeks, right? You guys set records.
Well, actually, it depends. Depending on the town, I think we set 3 records in Lafayette and 4 shows or whatever. But yeah, we were kind of like, what the fuck is going on here? Because again, for me, it was bizarre. But for Bobby and Dennis, they'd been doing this again for years. Dennis started in 1972. It had been 12 years. He'd been in main event teams with Phil Hickerson or David Schultz or, the original incarnation of the Midnight Express in smaller territories. But not only and Bobby had worked Georgia and worked for Nick, but they'd never made this kind of money. They'd never had this kind of push in a major territory. And nobody had ever just come to them and said, yes, you are the top fucking guys. And we're operating under those assumptions, first and foremost. So when it started working, but it was a difference in style because, again, we've talked about this, the talent that was in Mid-South, a lot of it was great, but some of it was stale or it needed a new look. And they needed the Rock and Roll Express for the girls. They needed Terry Taylor because he was good looking. Jim Duggan was a great baby face, but he wasn't a sex symbol. And new shit, new finishes, new approaches, new ways to do things. I was different than Akbar. It was just a change and Dundee was a great finish guy and had all the Tennessee stuff that didn't work there anymore because it had been done, but it hadn't been done in this territory. And then Watts had incredibly strong TVs and had good deals with the buildings and had the infrastructure in place so you could go in and do something like that. It wasn't like the territory was dead because people weren't watching the TV or they'd lost their buildings. It was just in the doldrums because it was kind of directionless and people had seen these guys. So, but we were more than fucking thrilled to be in the middle of the thing and be kind of responsible for it. And again, I didn't know they made checks like that in wrestling at that point in time. When I looked, I was like, God damn, I told you that story when I saw the check that Lawler had for $3,900 in the locker room in Louisville that night. And I said, geez, Jerry, is that for last week? He said, that's for last Monday night. And he said, maybe if you're in a business long enough, you'll have a check like that. I wanted to photocopy this one that was bigger and send it to him. So, well, son of a bitch, you were right. A year later, wouldn't you know who just bought the pony?
Although, was he being condescending when he said that to you?
Well, yes, he was, because it was he was handing out the paychecks, right? But his was sitting there and as I took my check in an envelope, his was just sitting there on the table, and he saw me looking at it. He said, yeah, maybe if you're in the business long enough, you'll have a check like that. Well, I fucking did. And then later on, I got a check bigger than that for one night. But that was the rib as we started this run, because Dennis and Bobby and I and the rock and roll to some extent, Terry Taylor, Dundee, felt at that point unappreciated for what we had done in the Tennessee territory. And we're like, look at this down here now. So we told Dundee to call Jarrett and tell him to send down some bigger buildings. Anywho, so that was again, the first week of April 1984. And when we get a chance to do this again, whenever that may be, we will do the second week, which includes that show at the Sam Houston Coliseum where,
oh man, yeah.
Again, that one, because we not only drew the all-time,
that could be seen by people. That's on video.
Yes, we drew the all-time gate record, $102,000. It was 12,284 people, which Paul Bosch said at the time was the most people they ever had in the Sam Houston Coliseum that have been running since the age of Christ. And from what we were told by the police, because we couldn't peek outside to watch, but they turned away a couple thousand people, because when we pulled up to the building an hour and a half before showtime, they were lined up 2 and 4 abreast all the way from the front door all the way around to the fucking back, around a city block of this goddamn building. And they'd already opened the fucking doors.
When did Paul Bosch start treating you differently?
That night. Because before, remember when he would yell at us, you can't fight here at the back of the building, you'll start a riot, or you can't do this in the ring, you'll start a riot. He saw that fucking house. He came in and shook our hands first every week after that. And how were you boys? Paul Bosch came to my wedding. I told you that, remember?
That's right.
And his wife, Valerie, and son, Joey. So, yeah, he remembered that kid. And that's another thing. That was even a bigger deal to us than the Superdome, because the Sam Houston Coliseum and the market of Houston, and they'd been running for fucking decades. And we come in, and in 3 months, we set the record fucking house. That was a big deal.
You haven't even done anything with the rock and roll yet, so it's kind of amazing.
No, we ain't got started with that yet. Yeah, we're just having cold matches because they put my face in the cake. That was the best part about it. We're like, fuck, this is swell.